Collaborating with spoken language interpreters and translators, a primer for school leaders. Key points. Research has consistently demonstrated that family engagement is imperative for student academic success, as it improves school readiness, forms good school-home relationships, and increases graduation rates. Bilingual school personnel and trained interpreters and translators play an essential role in strengthening homeschool connections by ensuring language access services for emergent bilingual students and families currently enrolled, parents or guardians contacting the school for the first time, or designated caregivers for pickup or drop-off or emergency contacts. This guide will provide research-based knowledge and resources about language access, qualifications of interpreters and translators, and how to ensure equity in communication. Legal responsibility. Legal responsibility for providing language access is described in the following federal legislation, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Equal Education Opportunity Act of 1974, the IDEA, and the Executive Order 13166 of 2000. You can find more information and detail about these laws on page 2 of the guide. According to the U.S. Departments of Justice and Education in 2015, schools must communicate information to limited English proficient parents in a language they can understand about any program, service, or activity that is called to the attention of parents who are proficient in English. You can find more information about this on page 3 of the guide. The term emergent bilingual is preferred over limited English proficient as it is descriptive of bilingual development, focuses on linguistic assets, and supports educational equity. According to federal guidance, some of the information that should be provided to emergent bilingual families in the language they prefer includes information related to registration and enrollment in school and school programs, grievance procedures and notices of non-discrimination, language assistance programs, parent handbooks, among other things. You can find a complete list on page 3 of this guide. Educational interpreters. Who are qualified educational interpreters? These individuals receive training and have mastered interpreting skills and techniques specific to special education procedures, early childhood, and K-12 settings and terminology. What are their roles and responsibilities? Along with the help of educators, interpreters share and help clarify information for families who are unfamiliar with the U.S. educational system. This includes explaining school vocabulary and jargon, as well as clarifying school policies. What knowledge and skills are needed? For in-person, over the phone, or video interpreting, the interpreter must receive training specific to education settings and be culturally and linguistically competent. This includes having sufficient knowledge of educational terminology and concepts, as well as mastery of interpretation skills and techniques to accurately convey information. How should school leaders select interpreters? Interpreters should be selected based on knowledge and skill level, according to a leveled or tiered framework based on recommendations from the following groups. You can find more information about all these questions on page 4 of the guide. Qualified Educational Interpreters of Spoken Languages, Tier System. Tier 1, Beginning Level. A Tier 1 interpreter should be prepared to support with basic enrollment activities, a spontaneous visit to a school, unplanned communication on the same basis available to English-speaking families, as well as parent-teacher conferences for basic progress reports. They must have demonstrated spoken language proficiency in English and other languages of interpretation, as well as successfully completed the foundational training specific to early childhood and K-12 settings. Tier 2, Moderate Level. A Tier 2 interpreter should be prepared to support with parent-teacher conferences or meetings that involve student support issues, meetings that do not have a legal context, or meetings where consecutive and sight translation skills are essential. They must have demonstrated experience and skills in consecutive and sight translation, have knowledge of basic educational terminology in English and the other language or languages used, as well as have active participation in ongoing professional development and skill-building opportunities specific for interpreters in education. Tier 3. Highest level. A Tier 3 interpreter should be prepared to support with academic planning, career counseling, IEPs, 504 plans, behavior or intervention plans, among other meetings that require a higher level of experience and knowledge. You can find a complete list on page 8 of the guide. They must have demonstrated experience and skills in simultaneous interpretation, have knowledge of specialized educational terminology in English and the other language or languages used, as well as have active participation in ongoing professional development and skill-building opportunities specific for interpreters in education. Specialized educational terminology refers to any related to psychoeducational assessments, best practices to work with speech pathologists and school psychologists, or mediation, discipline, legal terminology. You can find more information on page 8 of the guide. Interpreters who already hold certifications in either healthcare or legal interpretation can be considered as Tier 3, provided they acquire specific training in educational terminology and frameworks. Hiring interpreters. Best practices for hiring qualified educational interpreters of spoken languages. Creating interpreter positions is the best solution to provide language access and equity in school districts. This can be through external or internal hires, through external agencies, or interpreters who have other formal training in the field. When using external agencies, make sure the interpreter's background and training are provided. Then compare the latter to NAETISL's tier framework. When hiring those formally trained in other fields of interpreting, they may need additional training on educational vocabulary and frameworks. School leaders may require or provide professional development before hiring. Smaller school districts may collaborate with bilingual personnel, such as teachers, parent liaisons, family engagement facilitators, cultural mediators, or other bilingual staff members who were hired for a role other than interpretation. If a school district uses bilingual staff as interpreters, they should be intentional and specific when identifying their roles and responsibilities. They should also train them to be fully compliant with the interpreter's code of ethics and standards of practice. You can find more information on this on page 9 of the guide. Improving language access. Steps school leaders can take to improve their language access services. Identify families who may need language access support and the languages they speak at home. This can be done through a home language survey upon registration. Require all bilingual staff in the district who engage in spoken language interpretation with families to receive adequate training in the role of interpreter and have demonstrated competency in interpretation skills. Establish a language access plan that specifies how to provide qualified and trained interpreters to families and the minimum requirements for interpreters. This should include that the district will not rely on minors to provide interpretation to families. Provide readily available and ongoing training to district staff on language access requirements, including how to arrange for qualified interpreters at district schools, effective ways to collaborate with interpreters, and the risks of relying on untrained individuals. Consult with school district counsel and risk management for legal advice about establishing or enhancing language access policies and procedures in the district, as well as the enforcement of federal language access law. Support the development of a national certification process for spoken language interpreters and translators in education. This ensures individuals meet evidence-based criteria which reflect standards of practice in their field, as well as demonstrate knowledge in content, vocabulary, and the code of ethics pertinent to educational interpreting. Certification process. National and state standards exist for individuals providing sign language interpretation in public schools, interpretation services in our state courts, medical facilities, and social services. After establishing a nationally vetted Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice, NAETISL and its committees are working on developing a pilot test to provide a certification path for educational interpreters. Our national certification test will include the following components: a written test in English, a sight translation test with 2 components, a consecutive interpretation test, and a simultaneous interpretation test. The written test will be in English and go over the Code of Ethics, roles of interpreter, vocabulary, and compensation techniques. The sight translation test will have 2 components: an English to non-English language portion, as well as a non-English language to English portion. The consecutive interpretation test will cover education terminology, protocols, vocabulary, idioms and slang, and preservation of register. The simultaneous interpretation test will only cover English to non-English language. From the first phase of the test development process, NAETISL has worked with subject matter experts and speakers of less commonly spoken languages in specific communities to ensure the inclusion of as many languages as possible in the certification process. At NAETISL, we know that when schools, families, and communities work together, children do better in school and are more likely to complete and enjoy their education. Providing emergent bilingual families access to qualified interpreters and translated materials is a requirement of the law and an integral part of school-community relations. Beyond language access for individuals